compassionate, courteous, and they kind of were setting them up. So they thought they were seeing how quickly they could unscramble a sentence, but really the researchers were setting them up to see, because they were told, once you unscramble the sentences, then come and find me and I'll tell you what to do next. And they had an actor there with the researcher, so that when the people finished unscrambling the sentences, they went and found him, and he was involved in a conversation. And really what they were doing is they were timing how long it took the people to interrupt, to butt in, right? And what they found was that the people that were primed, you know, with words that were courteous, they waited the full 10 minutes. The people that were primed with more aggressive words couldn't even wait, you know, half that, some 3 to 5 minutes before they just butt in. So from there, you know, they started to do a lot more of these studies. Some were peppered with words signifying old age, fragile, bingo, these things. And what they were watching was how quickly or slowly they walked versus, you know, coming into the room versus going out of the room. And they found, and they repeated this study a few times because it's a bit controversial, that the people that were primed with words signifying old age left the study at a much slower rate, sometimes anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds slower to reach the elevator. And of course, it's totally outside of your conscious awareness. So there's priming with language, which I like because it kind of gives a lot of validation to Erickson's work and embedded commands and the interspersal method that we, you know, many of us use. But they did priming where they had people do the ultimatum game. And in psychology, that's really about getting two people and having them pick whether they're going to make the offer or make the decision. But really, it's rigged. So you pick a thing, and it says, here's $10. How are you going to split it? Now, you make an offer, and if the person doesn't think it's fair, then nobody gets anything. And what they find is that if they set this up in a room where at the end of the table is a briefcase and maybe a portfolio and pen, I think, in the studies, that people on average, that less than 50% of people will split it evenly. Whereas if it's a neutral thing, like a backpack, 100% of the participants of the study split it evenly. But as soon as you put this briefcase, people all of a sudden acted in their own self-interest and would keep 70 and give 30, percent. And so they kept repeating studies like this and how influenced. But what I love is whenever they ask people, why did you do this, they will come up with a rational, conscious explanation. So that is what the conscious mind does. It is constantly building narratives, right, out of thin air. It's the unconscious mind is driving the bus, and we just kind of make rational reasons why we've just done what we've done. Why did we quit that diet, or why did we do this or do that? And really, we have so many unconscious biases, prejudices, filters, heuristics, all of these things that are influencing us every moment. I always, when my classes come in the morning, I always have really good coffee brewing and all sorts of teas, and I always ask them to, get some coffee, get some tea, so that, they're sitting there with a warm, beverage, and I start talking about the unconscious influence. And I say, just because you're holding this warm liquid, research suggests that you would, in a survey, rate me as a warmer individual. Mm-hmm. Right? So we have that, and we have, and if you can smell the Windex, even if you can't consciously, your unconscious mind is going to tidy up after yourself because there is a subtle hint of cleaning agent in the air. So all of these things are influencing us. So that comes from some of the research on priming. I mean, there's so much more. I could talk about this for hours because I find it absolutely fascinating. So then it's about how can we use it, right? So that's one of my things. I'm a bit of a research junkie, and to me, it's just exciting because I read a research study and I think, ooh, how can I use that? You know, how can I make use of this? Oh, the brain does this. How can we create a process that would speed that up? And so for me, it's really about how do you use priming. So we already know language. We already know you can set the environment. We know that if there's, you know, a picture of a green forest, like right behind me is a photo I took, and it's, if you can see it, it's beautiful, it's a forest, there's a waterfall. But research suggests, and they've done many studies, that, you know, as far as healing goes, you are not only boosting certain interleukins and boosting the immune response just by looking at a photo of nature. Now, obviously, walking in nature is better. You're also reducing cortisol levels, so you're de-stressing. And I find all that fascinating. So that's another way to utilize the idea that we're always being influenced. So whether it's the temperature in the room, you know, whether it's the lighting, all of these things actually have play.
Indeed. It's sort of like a multi-evocational thing, where utilizing all sorts of different frames to bring in the idea, the set that you want to direct.
Exactly. And I just find it absolutely fascinating because, you know, so much of the research nowadays coming out of both social psychology, embodied cognition, and neuroscience is really validating what we've been doing for many, many years, you know, but it's nice to have that. It's really, it adds a few more layers as to what we can then do with it. So, you know, Erickson was way ahead of his time on so many levels because he was, you know, I mean, due to his life and his circumstances, he really did hone his sensory acuity. Because there's certain things that, you know, if we are taking in any given moment unconsciously millions of bits of information, and we are sending out millions of bits of information every moment, and yet consciously we're aware of almost nothing, like 40 to, you know, to a million. Then it really is about learning how to utilize that. So what are some of the ways that I can be aware of my nonverbal communication? So how can I hold certain beliefs, certain presuppositions, certain ideas in mind that are going to make me absolutely congruent with this client's outcome? And so, you know, Erickson would do that. He would go into trance to do trance work. So anyway, did I answer you? Does that?
Yeah, well, you're going well. Now, there's a person called Gar in the room who said in the text, I imagine priming is utilised in advertising quite a bit. Now, I know that's the fact, and I'm thinking of things like Darren Brown, who quite often do a whole elaborate setup that brings about the end result that somebody sort of thinks of the thing that he wanted to think about.
Well, what's really exciting about Darren Brown is that he will lift certain studies right out of the laboratories of the social psychologists. You know, there's a few books that that you might like. The Invisible Gorilla, that talks about change blindness. And they have a few different studies that they did that you can then go on YouTube and watch Darren Brown do it on the street, right? So the one where he asked someone for direction and then people pass by with like a big poster or door and they switch individuals who are asking for directions and no one notices.
That's right.
Right? That was done in social psychology experiments, and then Darren Brown duplicates it. So he's really fantastic in bringing general awareness to some of these things. It's quite fascinating, and priming, you know, he's all over that research.
Indeed.
So as far as advertising goes, I mean, I remember years and years ago reading a book called The Naked Brain.
Yes.
And it was by this guy Richard Restak or something. And it talks just about that, you know, the whole how they're utilizing all of the research in neuroscience in advertising to get you to buy. But there's even more. I mean, some of it is fascinating. Like there was this one study where they had people comparing different teas. Right, and one tea was named some random thing, and the other one was had a name that had the first 3 letters of the individual's name. And without fail, the person will always choose the one that contained elements of their name, even though it was the same pot of tea, the same exact tea. Exact. So it's not even like one was stronger, one was weaker. It was poured from the same pot. But if our name is in it, we don't realize that. So all of these things are a constant barrage of unconscious influence. So we have that, and then we have, you know, the more strategic advertisers. And at this point, I would imagine almost every advertising firm is up on this research. They know that certain smells in department stores, I mean, they've done these tests. You know, there's different scents that will make women purchase, and then different scents that will make men purchase. It's fascinating, and it's going on all around us. So just bringing your awareness to that, and sometimes pointing out inherent confirmation biases and cognitive biases to your clients, it really starts to, you know, get them curious. And one of the main things I want people to be in my office is curious. Certainly curious about their issue, curious about the solution. The brain is engaged, the dopamine is flowing, and that's when people can learn, you know. So, so when I bring in, at this point, I use research, whether it comes from, you know, all of these studies, or whether it's research on how the brain creates memories and just how malleable our memories are, and that helps to explain why certain techniques that I'm using or processes I'm using actually work. You know, I'm in New York City, so people like a good, you know, explanation to hang the change on. People do like to know. And so I use these research studies as bullet metaphors so that I can embed commands, so that I can build stories, so that I can nest loops. You know, I'm never telling stories about once upon a time, you know, some whatever fairy tale. I'm saying, hey, this is what's happening when you do this. You know, here's why I can't listen to that same sad story you've been telling for 20 years. This is what's happening in the brain. This is why you're going to change. So, you know, that to me, it plays a pivotal role in what I do, and that's part of coaching the unconscious mind. It's really about learning how to pull all of this in to build expectation, to, you know, to understand that people are literally operating under so many different biases that you've got to take their story, their narrative, you know, with a certain grain of salt, and look for what biases might be at play. You tease them out, and then they're no longer unconscious. Anyway.
Brilliant. Now, just for people who don't realise what's happening,
yeah,
Scott,
where is Scott?
Oh, I've been the whole time.
he's been frozen out. In fact,
I was listening back about 16 minutes ago. I've just been listening to this and enjoying it so much I didn't want to stop it.
Well, I saw your face for a moment, and then it disappeared, and I'm looking at this beautiful
Yeah, it's my desktop.
road ahead.
That's a picture I took in Death Valley.
Death Valley.
Yeah. lowest elevation in America. And anyway, I was just listening to the two of you chat, and you were discussing some of the things that I wanted to discuss tonight anyway. So I was just letting you guys just.
All right, cool. I watched your was it last week's your call to arms where you played some of the Mozart.
The Amadeus, yes.
And you had the sushi chef. I really like that. I like some of your metaphors.
Thank you. Well, let's transition into you and I talking. Although Lori did a phenomenal job jumping in on the fly.
Thank you, Fable.
Yeah, thank you very much. But
I'm muted, so I can't say anything at all.
Don't blame me.
I'm not even going to try to press buttons for the rest of tonight. I don't know what my computer's doing. But for those of you who guys have been listening and hearing all this and going, oh my gosh, this is great, where can I get more? Before I say anything else, we should just say Melissa teaches a class at HPTI, and the class she runs is going to be happening again in April. If you don't have a lot of background in NLP, we have an NLP class taught by Michael Watson, and I just love his stuff. And his class is going to be in March, the month before. And then we obviously have all our other so many of our other classes that are available anytime. So if you like what you're hearing tonight, a class on this topic will be taught by Melissa with a lot of Q&A time in April. So go to hpti.org to find that.
And I'm also, Scott, I'm also doing a 2-day pre-conference class at HPTI. So
Hypnothoughts Live. Hypnothoughts Live.
Yeah, that Hypnothoughts Live.
Yes,
Sorry.
I was just about to bring it up. I was going to say, and if you like it in April, just a couple months later, you can come train in person with Melissa. So you guys should pay attention to that because I just think your stuff's cool. And Melissa, I think you're a really interesting person to listen to talk about hypnosis because you are simultaneously a nerd and a badass. And that's a really neat combination because you do your homework and you dig into studies and you like looking at those research studies and then you do look for how you can apply it. In very much the same way that Darren Brown you were just alluding to. I think you're doing some similar stuff where you're looking for your angles and how you can use this stuff. Sometimes irreverently, which I think is really, really fun. So I just want to pick your brain about some of that stuff tonight.
All right, cool.
And talk about, you were talking about some of it already as it relates to priming. And before we get into more of that, there are pieces I want to talk about, and I don't even know if we're going to get to all of it, about mirror neurons and plasticity and bilateral stimulation and all this stuff that you and I have talked about before. And the neat thing for people who are listening to this to take away from is it's that old cliche where the Native American Indians don't waste any part of the buffalo and they use all the parts. Melissa's using all the parts she can of the human brain to create change. And I think it's really, really cool. So you were just talking about priming, and I think we've got a good base on that. I want to jump into mirror neurons because I think this is something that's such a fundamental piece of, in my opinion, some of your recent book that you wrote with Sean Carson, which is the book that we use for the HPTI class. And the stuff you talk about mirror neurons and how that applies to a hypnotist and client selection as well as your ability to interrupt clients. Can you just talk a little bit about that piece of neurology and how it applies in your office?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, let's use it more as a metaphor because the fact is there's still so much we don't know. What we do know is that, and there's some newer research out on from what are they calling this field? I want to say neurobiology, but there's another piece to that. Dan Siegel and a bunch of other people at his center or institute are really looking at different ways of utilizing this kind of resonance circuitry, that we have social brains. And mirror neurons are that, you know, when you are, see, we kind of elaborate on the actual research, so I have to make that clear. And that's why I prefer to speak in metaphor, because, you know, these are models, and who knows, in 5 years we're going to find out we were just scratching the surface. So some of the research on mirror neurons is, you know, when you're watching someone. So I'm always aware when I am doing a demo in front of my class. You know, I'm aware that if they're watching me with the intention to duplicate, that what tends to happen is that their mirror neurons are mirroring, are literally it's almost like the part of the brain that is involved in doing what I'm doing is starting to get engaged. So a lot of this was through motor responses, you know, whether you're, you know, it starts with looking at a monkey's brain, and they were doing some research and they went to, you know, take a break from the study, and they still left the sensors on the monkey, and when the researcher grabbed, you know, a banana, or maybe it was raisins, I can't remember, and he goes like this, the same area of the monkey's brain lit up as if he was reaching for and eating the banana. So that was the start. Like everything in science, it's a happy accident. You know, it was like, what was that? What just happened there? So then people really dove into mirror neurons and the fact that, you know, it's probably at the basis of how we learn, how babies learn by watching. You know, even a brand new newborn, you know, you stick your tongue out, the baby, you know, so we're kind of in sync like that. And now they're expanding that a little bit with, you know, resonance circuitry, and that two people can actually influence the brainwave state of each other, right, through this kind of shared space. It's kind of interesting, and it starts to sound a little Californian, so forgive me on that, but where are you? You guys are around there anyway.
We are with it, and we are down with things that sound Californian.
So, you know, so then, okay, you look at the research and you think, how am I using this? So in my class, I'm aware of certain things, right? When I'm sitting with a client, I'm aware of certain things. One of the things that we were talking about with understanding how much information is being transmitted from, you know, my brain to my clients, from my clients to mine, and not just, you know, I mean, yes, it's the brain, but it's also everything about how that brain manifests in my tone of voice, my body language, my breath rate, my, you know, everything, my subtle micro expressions, all of these things share what I'm thinking. So to start to be more aware of what you feel and think about this client is really important. You know, when I teach doctors, if I'm teaching pain management and I've got a bunch of physicians, and I say, look, if there's someone in your office and you don't think you can help them, get the fuck out of the room. You know, refer them to someone else, because you're not doing them any good. Because there's so much information we are getting from even if you're saying the right words, even if you're trying to smile, and, you know, everything else is going to give you away. So if you're aware of that, you're aware that even on a neurological level, you are communicating your brain to their brain, then you start to look for ways to make sure that you're congruent, right? So whether it's see this person in front of you as already achieved their goal, they've already healed, they've already, you know, whatever their goal is, I make sure that I get my clients, you know, laughing, curious, having a good time kind of right away. I prime them with that. My office is fun. You know, it's got a lot of bizarre elements to keep people kind of somewhat engaged, and mainly I do that so that I can watch them. I can be aware of how they look in those moments where they're smiling and happy, so that even when they're telling me their pain story or their limitation, I can hold them smiling in mind, so that everything I say, my tone of voice, my body language, my breath rate, everything is congruent with the better version of themselves. Does that make sense? So that I'm aware of what's happening. I know that I can then utilize mirror neurons on many levels. So if I want to interrupt patterns and I want to stop them, I kind of stop even myself. So there's many different ways of utilizing that. When I do and teach any process, you had mentioned bilateral stimulation. To me, that's just another pattern interrupt. And it's all kind of in this frame of rewiring the brain, and that's another great metaphor to use, to embed commands, to build expectation, but also to instruct and to say, look, here's the research on, if these people with severe OCD, could rewire their brain almost completely in, 6 weeks, then what do you think we can do? And so I utilize my body, my actions. I go into trance first, always. I go into the state I'm inviting them to go into. So even bilateral stimulation, there's many layers to understanding how to begin to go first, trusting that my brain is going to do something and it's going to influence theirs. So that's a little bit of how I use some of the research in mirror neurons and the social brain. And
so for me, when I'm talking to other hypnotists about what they do in their office, because I think so many of us are doing such dramatically different things. And we all talk to each other and hearing what they're doing. And when I'm a nerd and I'm reading studies and I'm a big psychobiology and biopsych kind of guy too, and applied neurology. And there's two questions that I like to kind of ask either to myself or out loud that I think you do a good job of answering before the question even gets asked out loud. And the two questions that I like to ask are why and so what, right? And so why are you doing this? Or you're doing that, so what? What's in it for the client? What's the application of this? Neat, that's in a research study, so what? What's it mean to the client? And I think you are, for a lot of people who read your work, and I think one of the reasons why you're popular is because you make that leap very short for people. And when you read your book and the stuff you've written with Sean and things like that, you make that a very easy leap for a lot of people. So to the people who haven't read Melissa's work, who are listening to this either live or on the recording, if you want to get into the mindset of how to use all this stuff, Melissa and Sean's work, these books that you guys have written, I think does such a great job of breaking it to a real practical, so now you do this because it does that for the human brain.
Yeah.
And that is
well. So with integrative hypnosis, which was my first book, I think it brings in a lot of why and how and deep trance, and it kind of talks about a broad range of things. And then with the anti-anxiety toolkit, I tried to simplify it even more. I mean, the book is like this tiny little book. Here's how to rewire your brain. Do this. This is what, this is what research says in one paragraph, and this is the next paragraph is what you do.
Yeah.
Right? And then keeping the brain in mind, we go a little deeper into, what's happening and why. And I think, we really are trying to make it as accessible as possible. Otherwise, people won't use it. I've been teaching long enough to know at this point what happens with too much information or too heady, because you and I, we've had many conversations. We get excited about this stuff, and I could talk about the implications of this research study or that research study, but if I don't immediately do something with it, they're not going to learn it. You know what I mean? So on many levels, I take my model of learning, which is no matter what I'm listening to or reading or watching, I got to immediately play with it. I'm like, when I get a new idea, a new technique, a new, you know, something from a book, or just any little thing. I'm like a kid with a new toy. I mean, I have biweekly practice nights and supervision nights for all of my students. I encourage everyone to keep playing, because to me this is, you know, it's an art form, and the more space you have to keep growing and trying new things and have you know, a never-ending source of learning, of trial and error and error and error and trial and error, and that's how we get good. But, you know, I don't charge my students for that, because we have this unspoken agreement, which is, you know, when I'm playing with a new toy, if I walk in and if I say, okay, everybody close your eyes, it's like, it doesn't matter how loud the room was, it's an immediate vomp. And everyone is just, okay, whatever. And I'm like, what happens if we imagine this? What happens if this happens? What happens if, and I'll just start to play right away. And so I try to do that in everything that I teach, so that people get as excited as I am, because that excitement tends to then carry over to their clients. And if you can get your clients excited, then you're halfway there, you know. And so for me, and I was when I was watching your other you know, webinar, whatever, I think last week or something, with Amadeus.
Yeah.
Part of that I really liked is, you know, Ramsey going and being willing to absolutely flub something and take his time, and there's the master doing this perfectly, and even though this is a top chef with all of his TV shows, he still goes into this beginner's mind, and he's still willing to play and fail. And, you know, I'm watching that, and I'm thinking it's one of the things that unfortunately in this field a lot of times gets lost.
Yeah.
You know, I've been teaching at enough conferences for, you know, 15 years at this point, where I see that, and you and I had a conversation, maybe it was last year in Daytona, because we were talking, and Marks Howell said, okay, I got to go into this class now. And we took a moment to just fully appreciate that Marks, who is amazing and who's been doing this for I don't know how many years.
When I learned hypnosis, I watched a video of his that was 10 years old when I watched it.
Okay, so he's been doing this forever, and he's just the sweetest guy ever, but he goes to almost every class and he takes notes.
Yeah, real notes.
He's like a kid. Whenever I'm doing a workshop, I can guarantee he's going to be sitting right there, you know, like front and center. And he takes notes, and you can see it. He gets this glint in his eye. And I thought, you know, this is what it's about. It's about going and playing. You know, I'm always searching, because sometimes it's one metaphor. It's one phrase that somebody says. You know, we get a little jaded, especially when this is not just our job, it's our, you know, career, but it's our fascination. So we tend to kind of sit back and say, yeah, I kind of know all this. But sometimes it's just a shift in perspective. Somebody offers one little metaphor, and I just take that metaphor and milk it. You know, what else can I do? What is this lead me to? And so, I mean, I love continuing to learn, and I think that's why this field is so fucking amazing. There's no cap on it. You know, we'll never get to the point, Scott, where you and I will say, we know everything there is to know about, you know, the mind.
Right, right. And I think, you know, part of what you're saying, I think, well, I totally agree with it. There's like, especially with you're talking about your students, so I think there's like sort of a gestation period where you get presented with an idea and then you can use it, right? And that gestation period is dramatically influenced by quick repetition. So if you read Ernest Rossi's book, which is just dry and heavy, and you read all that and then you don't apply any of it, that just sits in your brain, and maybe someday the gestation period is over and you can start using it. But taking stuff and making it immediately applicable and playing with it as soon as possible really just shortens up that amount of time.
Well, and also being willing to
be
to be playful.
Yeah.
To say, well, I don't know. I mean, I do this with my clients all the time. I mean, I say, well, that's weird. Okay, so the image that you just made over here, what happens if we do this? Like, what does that do? Let's nudge this. What does that do?
Yeah, yeah.
And so to get into that state inspires your clients to go there with you. And so I'm always saying, I read this crazy thing the other day. Let's see if it works. Sometimes students will be filing into class, and if I've just read something, I start off always with a bit of a skeptical mindset, because especially when, there's, this technique and it'll solve every problem there is. Then I'm like, oh, Christ, here it goes again. But I can never just leave it alone, even if I think 98% of what they're saying is bullshit. I want to know what that 2% does.
Sure.
So I'll just, like, every single person that walks in, I'll say, here, do this. What's happening? Here, think of something that gets you angry. Let's do this, Because, if I don't play with it, then I never know. But I think just having that that mindset is also good for students, because they see that I'm still playing too. I do a lot of demo days, because my students really love to learn that way. So in my classes, I'm always doing, it's the way that I work. I talk about the process, I show the process, then I hand it to them and say, do the process, and then we go, so there's always this kind of repetition even within each hour, because I know how the brain learns, and you've got to put things in little chunks. And anyway.
Well, so we're running low on time. I want to say again to people who are listening to this, I'm talking to Melissa Tiers. She's teaching a class in April for HPTI on integrative life coaching. She's teaching a 2-day pre-conference at Hypno Thoughts Live. And I want to shift gears a tiny bit and talk sort of about soft skills that relate to this. Because, we're talking about nerding out and we're talking about working with clients. But I want to talk about the soft skills that, anybody, but specifically you in this case, bring to the work. And that comes from background, and that comes from all that stuff. And I think some people know, it's not a secret, but it's not talked about a ton, that you come from a music background. You come from a rock and roll background, right?
Yeah.
And what part of that, because what you were just saying in terms of, just the ability to roll up your sleeves and screw around and play with this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Is that the connection? Is that where that comes from? Is that a causation, correlation kind of thing? Talk about rock and roll. Talk about you, as much as you're comfortable with, and as it applies, your background with that, and if there's a view thing that's similar.
Well, I think, I think certainly a lot of, my rock and roll life, which was a long chunk of my life, it was really, it helped me to kind of be able to engage people a little bit, to get excited. What's funny is, if I listen to some of my old songs, I realize, I'm still talking about the same shit, right? So whether, I'm railing against the pharmaceutical industry, or, I had a punk rock band, so it was very angry and very political, and sometimes I hear myself going off, my students know how to ask a particular question which will nudge me, and they know that it's just amusing to watch me get a little rantish. So I think on some level, a lot of that comes through in maybe my presentation skills. I tend to pace. So if I'm in front of, let's say, a bigger class, even in my center, when I teach, I'm pacing, right? Mm-hmm. And that too, if I see old video footage of me on stage, I'm always doing that. So I think it's, a way of not getting hit by a bottle. But it's also just being able to kind of think on your feet, I guess. I was never trained in music. I don't read music. It was always by ear, and really I was more a lyricist than anything else. You know, I can dink out the kind of notes on a guitar and say this is the basic song, but really it was the lyrics. And you know, that's trance work too, right? It's all lyrics, and it's being able to be a wordsmith. So my trance work is definitely aided by I think my music skills and things like that. I think maybe my irreverence, maybe the fact that I get that this shit is all made up and not to take it so seriously, and countless times. I mean, that is, you know, one of my catchphrases at this point, which has become very funny and a joke. You know, it's an anchor. I just say, okay, everybody, and they know a certain expression on my face, and the whole class will say, yeah, yeah, this shit is all made up. When somebody gets a little too hooked on, what was step 3? Because we did step 1, and so my first question whenever I hear that is, number 1, did it work? Because if it worked, you did it right. Because there is no right. This is just, these are some ways of doing this, and somebody made this shit up, and you can make your own shit up. And so, you know, that's kind of, I guess, pretty consistent in my whole life, not just my musical life. And I think if we can all agree that we shouldn't take some of this stuff so seriously, and people kind of get very attached to their models, and then it's hard for them to, you know, to be flexible. Anyway, I don't know if I answered you, but
you answered it wonderfully. By the way, I don't know if you were reading in the chat, there's a number of people who would either like to hear a recording or a live performance from you, but I'll let you off the hook on that.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I wasn't going to push you on that. But I don't know.
I just need a link. I just need a link to the song.
Opera.
Yeah, there's a lot of people asking for links. But
you know, it's funny, in my last class we were talking about, I had an addictions, I know you work with addictions, and I used to have a song called Fell Down 12 Steps, and it was a pretty angry, anti, you know, kind of 12-step song, and I was persuaded to recite all of the lyrics to that and another song, Lego My Ego, which is anti-pharmaceutical industry. So once again, I'm still, you know, still raging against the same machine, just in a very different way. Sort of.
But we're running actually a couple of minutes late. I don't know, have you seen that interview with Dave Grohl where he talks about switching from playing the drums to playing the guitar?
I did.
You'd love it. Look up Dave Grohl. I think it's called Off the Air. It's this black interview, and he talks about not wanting to take drum lessons or guitar lessons and not knowing any of that stuff and just feeling it and just making it up. And and what you just said is very similar to what Dave Grohl says about all of music. And it's really, I mean, it's 4 minutes long and really, really good. You'd love it.
No, I'll definitely check it out. I used to, you know, in rehearsals, if I sat behind the drum kit, the entire band left the room.
Because you were just screwing around?
Because I was loud and obnoxious, and you know, I'm sitting here in my living room. Over there is a big drum kit because my husband is also a musician, drummer, composer. He plays everything. So there's lots of musical instruments, and you know, he also is not classically trained. So, and he writes classical music without knowing how to. So, you know, it's in the family. Which goes back to bring it kind of full circle, that goes back to, you know, Erickson wasn't trained in Ericksonian hypnosis, and, you know, Erickson didn't know what a swish pattern was and all that stuff. You know, Erickson didn't do Ericksonian hypnosis, but anyway, but that's a whole other story, you know. Exactly, right? Like, you know. Case studies were so fucking authoritative and direct. I mean, you can't get more direct than that, but I get what you're saying. But yeah, the myth of Erickson that, you know, hypnotists are now taught of well, this. I think, you know, and we could have a whole nother discussion on the real brilliance of Erickson, and I do think a lot of people they kind of miss the point. I remember maybe it was even HypnoThought. Somebody asked for, does anyone know where I can find the tomato plant script, the tomato plant induction? And I'm like, Jesus Christ, really? Really? Really?
I had a conversation with someone today, and I was talking about how many clients I see a week and how many groups I do a week and all that, and he goes, wow, you must have a lot of scripts. I was like, no, I can't afford to have scripts. I'm doing too much. If I had scripts, I'd be screwed. And he goes, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we kind of agree there. I won't even, if I'm walking around my classroom and I see someone is having a little too much of a relationship with even their notebook while they're doing a process, I take it away.
Yeah.
To me, that the script is right in front of you. The script is, with the breath rate and the muscle tonus. The script is in the words they say. And so if you start off with that, you'd be surprised how it's kind of like throwing someone into the water. They learn to swim.
They better. And the ones that don't learn to swim don't pay for the second class. That's almost always the case.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. People figure it out.
Yeah, they do.
Figure.
Well, we are past time, but you and I could just sit around and talk about this for hours. Well, thanks for sticking through that rough start with my tech troubles. We're switching software.
Fable held my hand and walked me through it.
Great like that. Thank you, Melissa. If you guys like this, please tell people to check out these recordings. And to those of you guys who've been sending in questions to me, keep it up. Thank you. Those of you who've been sending in topics, please keep it up. We're going to be answering those. And I will see you all in this class again next week. And Melissa Tears, thank you very, very much.
So can I just ask you, this class is what? It's not a class you're teaching, it's just a weekly webinar that you do?
Yeah, it's unofficially connected to HPTI, and it was originally just for HPTI students, but we've opened it up just for anybody who wants to check it out.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
I'll check it out next week.
Yeah, it'll be fun. And so what we do is we do an interview every other week. So every other week's an interview, and the opposite week is me talking about something like sushi chefs and Mozart. So it gives me a little free time to just come up with ridiculousness.
All right, and you're good at that.
It's kind of my thing. It's kind of yours.
All right, man. Be well. Happy New Year.
You too. You too. Thanks, everybody, and good night.